All right, good morning everybody. Let's get on and complete this lecture 11 on the SSM case study conducted in the health service sector. We have explained the background of the case study by telling you about the history of the National Health Service of United Kingdom and how it operated from its inception in the 1940s until about the 1980s, at which time the professionals employed by the National Health Service, doctors, nurses, and other qualified personnel who used to be taking or participating in decision-making came under questioning because of funding difficulties, and the government had the idea that more efficient decision-making should be established in the service, so that some sort of performance criteria can be put in place. So the idea is, of course, not very new, but it appeared at the time that if some sort of market mechanism could be installed in the service, then supply and demand would take effect, and funds or monies will be spent efficiently in accordance with the long-term objectives of the service. But of course, complete privatization was not considered, and some sort of internal market or an artificial market was to be established such that the service would be divided into two providers and purchasers and suppliers. The suppliers would present the health services available or in need, in demand. And the purchasers, these are other bodies in the National Health Service, would buy by contract these services from the suppliers. The suppliers are normally the hospitals and things like that, and they are called trusts. So there are trusts and there are purchasers, and these purchasers would buy health service from the trusts according to the needs of the district in which the trust is located. So, of course, this requires a lot of new reorganization within the health service, especially in terms of information systems. And our case study is about the establishing of an information system in an area where two hospitals merge into a single trust. Okay, that's what we have explained up to the point where we left off last week. The organization of the SSM implementation in this case study was that, of course, we also explained that the managers who are involved in this project knew about Checkland's SSM methodology, and therefore they invited Checkland as a supervisor, as a consultant, and the study was initiated. It would be conducted by the participation of about 40 teams. These teams would be formed selected from the professionals working in the trust, who would be the doctors, nurses, accountants, other personnel, qualified personnel, and these people would form committees and work on their own, and at the end of each month there would be a session where all the committee members met and progress was to be discussed. So that was the organization. Each group would be assigned a function that takes place at two sites. These two sites are the two hospitals forming the trust, where they would examine the core purpose activities and information needs. Since this is an information system project which tries to establish the needs for information and the way that information would be supplied, The inquiry is about information needs. Of course, information needs depend on what you are trying to do, your core purpose. These activities can be classified under the core purpose as core purpose activities like surgery, medicine, nursing, theaters. Theaters are the places where they hold operations on patients, business, etc. So several such items are relevant. Team members would keep on carrying their routine tasks as usual with no exception, which means that the research would be conducted by the people who are active in the organization. So these people would normally be expected to carry out their normal duties of nursing, taking care of patients, performing operations, etc. So the research is something like a part-time activity where normal activities also continue. A strategy was to be developed within 6 months, so the project had a deadline of 6 months for reasons which are not explained in the reading. So this 6-month deadline, of course, placed other restrictions on the research. For example, it would not be possible, for example, to reorganize the activities in a more efficient way and then determine the information needs. The activities would continue as they did in the past. There would be no reorganization of the activities for greater effectiveness or efficiency. That would wait until later, perhaps. But within these 6 months, the strategy, information strategy, would be based on the current pattern of activities with no changes envisaged in the current activities. The facilitators of the project were the information officer. Actually, this is the person who initiated the project, a senior management consultant, a consulting firm company, management consultancy company was invited also, and they participated with a senior management consultant, and Peter Checkland, who was also invited. As I have been saying, a joint workshop every month of team representatives with all the facilitators would meet to discuss progress and problems. The ideas of Checkland at the inception, at the beginning of the project, were to construct activity models only for major hospital activities, discuss information needs based upon these models, compare present information support with the needs elicited in these discussions, and reformulate strategies. So roughly, the project would proceed like this. Purposeful activity models would be constructed for major activities of hospital activities. Information needs would be discussed based on these models. The present information system would be compared with the would-be information system or an idealized information system that will appear from these discussions, and the strategy, information strategy, would be reformulated in this way. So this was roughly, and this is obviously the procedure that we are familiar, the SSM procedure that we are familiar from our previous lectures. You know that we have a vague, a fuzzy distinction of purposeful activity models belonging either to a category of primary task or issue, okay? Issue-based. And in this situation, priority would be given to primary task models rather than issue-based models. Issue-based models concern decision problems that you have to resolve in an organization. But since the present pattern of activities would be preserved and would not be changed because of the 6-month limit, it was decided that that they should stick to primary task models and do not discuss issues because they didn't have enough time. So the course of the project was summarized like this. This is the chronology of the project, which started in March and ended in September, as you can see. In March, the teams were formed. March, April was spent for modeling. These are the purposeful activity models that were constructed in the course of the project. The modeling did not start from zero. I mean, the teams, the 40 teams, were not told to construct their models from scratch because they didn't have any experience with SSM. It would be difficult for them to start modeling right away. So what they did in this project was some generic models were built. Generic models actually are models which could be applicable to any hospital situation. These models were constructed by Czechland. From his knowledge of hospital operations, he constructed some generic models. These generic models were supplied to the teams. The teams were free to play with these models and make any modifications. That was for the purpose of helping them to explain them what models look like, etc. So generic models were built to help the teams. In April, teams derive models for their area of concern. From these generic models, they obtained the exact models. And during May and June, information requirements were assessed through the analysis of these models. Through July, August, comparison with the real world identified the opportunities and the gaps that existed. So monthly meetings with team leaders to review the progress went on through these to April to August. And in September, an information strategy was created and presented to the board of the trust. Okay, so this was how activities proceeded throughout in the course of the project. As we said, the project was integrated with the day-to-day operations. The day-to-day operations were going on at the same time as the project was progressing. The project was launched by the CEO of the trust of the acute hospital in a meeting of about 100 people. So if you, for example, take some part in such a project in the future, it's good to remember how you can start the project, how you can launch the project, launching the project. Of course, you have to launch the project because many people will be participating in the project and they don't have any idea of what it is about in the beginning. So what you do is, in this case, what they did was to convene a meeting of maybe 100 people. So these are the key personnel who would be forming the teams in the project. Strategy was emphasized to emerge from the group and not from the management. In this meeting, it was emphasized and told the attendees, the attending personnel, that strategy would be coming out of them and not from the management. The top management would not be defining or dictating the information strategy. It was up to all the participants to formulate the strategy. This was stressed because people are not used to this sort of working, soft systems working. And normally they expect management to tell them what to do in terms of information needs or information operations. And it was emphasized that this would not be the case. The CEO was present, the CEO of the acute hospital was present in the meeting. This was important because it demonstrated that the study was taken seriously by the trust. So top level participation in soft system projects is very important because it transmits the message that the top management is taking this very seriously and is committed. Okay. 3 facilitators explained the work to do. So then these 3 facilitators, including Czechland, explained the work to do to this meeting of 100 people. And as we already said, Çağlar prepared at several levels generic models relevant to acute hospital operation. Generic means, of course, like blueprint models that could be applied to any hospital in general, which would, of course, have to be modified according to the particulars of the specific hospital later on. This was a choice made specific to this situation. I mean, in this particular case study, it was important and necessary to prepare generic models. Normally, of course, in SSM, you don't all the time need generic models. So preparation of generic models is not something that happens in all instances of soft systems projects. Okay, it was specific to this particular project. Information systems would be shaped to serve taking current hospital organization as given. That's, again, something we mentioned before. The current organization would not be changed. I mean, the activity pattern would continue as before. For this reason, analysis 2 and 3 were omitted, since the study addressed an explicit question in this particular situation. Analysis 2 and 3 are used to formulate what sort of question is going to be addressed. Since in this case it was clear, so these steps could be skipped. We are making these comments to show you that the SSM is a methodology, as I have repeated several times before, and not a method. It's not an algorithm. You can modify it as you need, as the situation requires. So in this case, these steps of analysis 2 and 3 could be omitted. The generic activity models would be enriched by considering and engaging in debates over the accounts of CATFO and the 3 E's. These models were not finalized, in other words. By making use of CATFO analysis and the 3 E's, these models would be enriched and finalized. So let's see some examples. A generic in the finding out and modeling phase, a generic model that would be relevant to any acute hospital was initially constructed, and Çağlar wrote down this root definition. Let's read the root definition. This is a very good example of what a root definition looks like in a situation, in a hospital situation. Not an entire hospital situation, but in a hospital situation where you need to devise a new information strategy. A system operating under a range of external influences, which, in the light of a strategy based on its capabilities and costs, delivers services defined in contracts with purchasers within the context of National Health Service norms and policies, that service delivery itself contributing to the ongoing development of its strategy for service provision. It's a little bit complicated language, but if you read it once or twice, you will see that it's a very, very meaningful root definition for an information system in such a hospital setting. And the CATFO analysis was later constructed based on this root definition. The customers of this information system are those receiving hospital services and purchases. Remember that purchases are the clients of the hospital, are the customers of the hospital. The provider or the producer of the services is the trust or the hospital, and the purchases are the other bodies in the National Health Service who are the customers for the services provided by the hospital. The actors are the hospital professionals. The transformation, this is for the acute hospital. This root definition is for an acute hospital. Is the need for acute services, and this need is satisfied. That's the transformation process of the acute service. The worldview is that acute services can best be provided by an organization dedicated to developing and delivering such services. This is the worldview of the acute hospital. The owners are the Hospital Management Board and, of course, the National Health Service Executive. In the environment, we have the NHS structure and norms, there's the purchaser-provider split, the internal market split between the purchasers and the providers. So these are in the environment. For efficacy, efficiency, and effectiveness, we can say that demonstrable delivery of a portfolio of services of suitable quality. This is the measure of efficacy, to see whether the acute hospital is capable of delivering the required services at a necessary level of quality, service quality. The efficiency, obviously, is the minimum of resource used to deliver these services, which could be expressible either in time terms or in money terms, probably in money and as well as time terms. And the effectiveness is the satisfaction of patients treated. The patients treated will have to be satisfied. The purchases will be satisfied, the NHS executive contributions to hospital reputation, etc. So based on such a root definition and CATFO analysis, the generic model drawn up initially by Czechland looked something like this. He, I think, produced a model which would be a little bit crowded, as you can see. It's not a very simple activity model consisting only of 7 plus or minus 2 activities. Instead, it has some subsets, as you can see, several subsets actually. The 7 plus or minus 2 activities are preserved not in terms of single activities, but sets of activities, as you can see, numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But each is a set. I think he did this on purpose to provide a complete picture of how or what sort of activities take place in an acute hospital and how. In number 1, as you can see, the activity group number 1, it says appreciate external influences. Obviously, this acute hospital has to operate to deliver the services required of them, has to operate within limits coming from the environment. These are the external influences. Like, for example, professional advances, that is, advances in medicine. In professional medicine, if there is a new type of technique developed or new equipment coming into the market or new ways of operating on patients have been published in journals, etc., all these professional advances need to be taken into account. The National Health Service changes in policy in the service have to be observed. Educational and research needs, public expectations. Public expectations are obviously the expectations of the population living in the area of the National Health Service. Other trusts' capabilities. Other trusts are the competitors of this acute hospital. Obviously, there are other hospitals in the area, maybe. These are the other trusts. And their capabilities are also important to take into account when we are planning our own operations, because in some sense, perhaps we have to cooperate with other hospitals, or maybe in some situations we have to compete with other hospitals. So other trust capabilities need to be taken into consideration. GPs' expectations. Now you understand that the system in England is such that there are GPs. These are the general practitioners, doctors. They do not sit in the hospital. They have their own offices throughout the region, maybe at each district or mahalle. It's like, this is something that the Turkish health ministry is trying to imitate in Turkey now. We have the family doctors projects is underway in Turkey. For example, where I live, I am assigned to a family doctor, although I haven't seen him or her. I don't know who she is, but this sort of thing. So the GPs are like this. They have offices all around the city, And if you are living in an area and you need attention, you first go to to the office of the GP, doktor muayenehanesi. You go there, the GP examines you. The function of the GP is very, very important. The function of the GP is to diagnose the ailment, the illness. In Turkey, we are very disorganized about this, because if I want to go to a hospital for some ailment, for some disorder, and I want to make an appointment at the hospital, the person at the end of the telephone asks me which service I demand, which doctor do I have to see. Well, I don't know which doctor I have to see. I have some trouble with my health. It's up to the doctor to diagnose and send me to it should be up to the hospital at least to diagnose and send me to the proper service. It doesn't work in Turkey. The GP here is responsible primarily for this. If, of course, the ailment is not something difficult to diagnose or treat, the GP will do the treatment as well. Only if it is necessary will the GP refer the patient to a hospital. So the GP's expectations should also be taken into consideration. That's another influence, external influence on the hospital. Then, of course, there are other activities. For example, number 2, develop strategy. This is the strategy of conducting or presenting the services of the hospital. Number 3, organize the organization to deliver these services. Number 4, the delivery, the actual delivery of the services and recording. Number 5 is monitoring of this delivery, service delivery. So this is how an acute hospital functions. You understand that this is the functioning of the hospital itself, not the information system. The acute hospital, which has to provide health services. How does the hospital provide its services? This is how it does it. It appreciates external expectations and constraints and all the other influences. It develops a strategy. It organizes to deliver these services according to the strategy. In number 4, it actually delivers these services. And in number 5, it evaluates its delivery by monitoring against plans. And then, as you can see, that monitoring is some sort of feedback, which we normally expect to occur outside in the 3 E's. The outside loop in the 3 E's actually is the feedback loop, which evaluates all the activities, compares them with criteria of efficiency, efficacy, and effectiveness, and if necessary, takes corrective action. Okay, that's what we normally observe, and it's also sitting outside here, as you can see. But this doesn't stop us from having an internal feedback link. You see, in number 5, there is another feedback loop which monitors the delivery and reports back to the strategy making step at the top. So this generic activity model is informative in that it illustrates the flexibility of such models where you have double loops, an outer loop and an inner feedback loop. You could have a third loop, so it's just a flexibility. I will not spend too much time on pointing out each of the elements. Let's just look at, for example, number 4. That's the actual delivery. How does it go? Well, in 4.1, that's the task step, provide services. You provide the service. This service could be conducting of an operation in a theater, or conducting an examination for diagnosis, or whatever. Then what you do is in 4.2, activity 4.2, is recording the performance levels and costs. Okay, you make a record of your delivery in terms of performance levels. This many milligrams of this medicine has been administered to this patient at this time, etc. You record that down. And then, of course, also, in addition to that, you record also the costs associated. Activity 3, record service delivered against contracts. You also record this service delivery against the contracts you made with the purchasers. You count this for one of the items in the contract, for example. And 4.4, seek payments from purchasers. You ask for the payments for, these are actual activities, as you can see. So this generic model was presented to the teams as an example. But this is a low resolution activity model for a generic acute hospital. I mean, low resolution, meaning that we are looking from a very high scale. All the particular activities, not all the particular activities are visible from such a low resolution model. So activities 2 to 5 could be expanded collectively under the external influences of activity 1. As I also mentioned, there's an inner feedback loop from 5 to 2. A high resolution, since this is a very rough model looking from a large distance, we need to come down in scale to finer resolutions. A higher resolution model of each activity is essentially needed to assess the information needs. So, for example, activity 4.1, which we have seen here, which just said provide services. Now, provision of these services has to be expanded. We need to differentiate between different types of services, etc., in order for us to be able to assess the information requirements. So this one is such a model which expands activity 4.1 in this way. As you can see, this is more detailed now. What does it say at the top? Appreciate hospital capability available. Do we have the resources, capabilities available in the hospital, first of all? For example, if this activity is about an operation, do we have any operation theaters available? What's the schedule of the theaters, etc.? So appreciate hospital capability. Appreciate requirements of negotiated contracts. Also, you have to, you see, all the operations have to be performed under contracts to the purchases. So you have to also look at the contracts for any possible arrangements. And then receive the request for service, accept the patient, diagnose the problem, provide the treatment, discharge the patient. These are the activities that normally are to be followed in providing the service. Then there are other things like establishing ancillary services available. Maybe some ancillary services will be needed. Ancillary yardımcı servisler, which are not provided within the course of these steps on the left, but provided elsewhere. For example, some sort of test may be required, which has to be conducted outside the hospital, because this particular test cannot be conducted in the hospital or something like that. So these services in 4.1.3, you establish whether these will be needed. And in 4.1.9, just underneath, it says, call upon ancillary services as appropriate. You make use of these services. And beneath that, record service provision and resource use for 4.2 in main model 4. You provide, you make the records. So expanding one activity in a low resolution model, purposeful activity model, in a higher resolution purposeful activity model is illustrated by these two models. Well, you can look at this CATFO for a generic service. Again, similar to preparation of generic purposeful activity models based on a generic root definition and CATFO, a generic service CATFO has also been prepared and made available for the use of these teams. Again, it's straightforward to look at this. When you, please make sure that you go through this case study carefully, because as you are aware now in the examinations, I include questions concerning directly these cases. So please read the reading again and compare the PowerPoint notes as you read the article itself, and make sure that you understand all these examples. More detailed modeling was taken further only by one more step for some of the activities. Now this is an important comment, actually. This next comment is important. What it says is that, as we have just pointed out, we started with the first generic acute hospital activity model. It was very high level and low resolution. We took out activity 4.1 from that and expanded it into another model, okay? It is possible, for example, to decide that this is the expanded model. You may decide, for example, that step 4.1.6, which is about diagnosing the problem. You may decide that this diagnosing the problem activity also has to be expanded, because it involves important activities, hospital activities, which have implications of cost, facilities, resources, etc. It is possible to expand a third time. That would be a third expansion, okay? What the comment says here is that more detailed modeling was taken further only by one more step for some of the activities. They have actually implemented a third expansion, but only a third expansion. It says experience indicates that modeling beyond 3 levels of detail is often not useful. So this is just a point for you to remember, maybe. If you should not keep on expanding activities, because what happens in the end you will be drowned under a multitude of many activity models, and then the other steps of discussion and deriving questions out of these models and deciding on common action would become infeasible. So 3 levels of expansions is the maximum according to experience. These generic models help to underline the point that SSM models were useful to structure discussions, and they were not example or models of the real-world situation. Rather than the usual inquiry for the activities and their linkages, they help to answer questions like, again, because of the specifics of the situation, questions like, for example, what information should be available to someone doing this activity? This sort of question. The questions are related to information this time, not the actual conduct of the activities. We do not, for example, ask the question, does this activity take place in the real world? How is it executed, etc. Such questions could also be asked, but more specifically, the questions are about information needs, especially because the activities, the present pattern of activities would not have to be, would not be under question, they would not be changed. So what information should be available to someone doing this activity? What is available at present? I mean, what sort of information is available at the present, and what information is missing? What information is generated by doing this activity? So these are, to whom should this information go? So these are the questions, sort of questions generated from the models. Gaps and opportunities not revealed directly by models emerged from the discussion and the debate. And here we have a slide from the reading itself, table 4.1, an illustration of the kind of chart used for information analysis. You remember that once the models are constructed, we start generating questions, putting questions and answering. And then these questions, etc., the answers are collected in a matrix. That's one method that you can use, as you remember. So this is such an example of a matrix or a chart. Activities from the model. These are activities 4.1.4 and 4.1.5. What is it? Receive request for service and accept patient. This is the first activity. Somebody comes in and you receive his or her request and accept the patient. How is this done? It's done by letter or by phone call. The letter is written by the GP, referring the patient to the hospital, or it's a phone call for an emergency. If there is an emergency, patients can also directly apply to the hospital by skipping the visit to the GP. Measure of performance, speed with which this request is handled. What information do we need? We need the patient's details, clinical condition and history. Contract situation. Contract situation is like the insurance clauses, whether they cover the clauses, yani sigorta koşulları bunu kapsıyor mu, kapsamıyor mu vesaire. Information support provided by the patient administration, the system itself. The system is the computer system. The gaps and opportunities, etc. So this goes like this. Diagnosing the problem is another activity, and these items are also, all these are obtained through questioning of the models, through the questioning of the models by all the professionals involved in the activities. Okay, so this is just such a chart. Discharging the patient. These are, it's a complete chart. I don't know why we included all this detail. I think this was included by Sinan Kayalıgil last year. But I don't need to go through all the details. Now, we are about to finish. What lessons can we obtain for SSM from this case study or from this experience? This is interesting for us to learn of the capabilities of SSM or its peculiarities in application. The first conclusion from this experience was that lack of knowledge was not a problem. What does this mean? It means that about 100 professionals would be conducting an SSM case study, but they have no knowledge of SSM previously. But this was not a problem. You see, this is an important lesson for us. So maybe some of you will become consultants in the future. Many of our graduates have consulting companies, and they're very successful in consultancy. And in such situations, if you are a consultant, maybe you can initiate such a project, especially strategy-making projects require this sort of approach. Again, I have a previous student. When I was teaching a course, it was some 20 years ago, I decided to teach a course on organization theory. I don't remember what was the reason, but I taught this course 2 or 3 times. And a student who took this course came later to visit me after several years, and he said, that course was so important for me, I formed a company, a strategic consultancy company, and he's very, very successful. So, for example, such an SSM project as we have seen for NHS is something that actually is conducted, although maybe our graduates are not calling it SSM because in those years we did not teach SSM. We were just teaching organization theory. So this lack of knowledge is not an obstacle for the implementation of SSM. Grasping of SSM is much easier in a live situation than in a classroom. So that was one point. Such a methodology which feels natural can help to counter the feeling among the members of a large, complex organization of no definite course to follow and no knowledge of direction. If this sort of action research, this is action research, the people who are doing the work of the hospital are also doing the project itself. So this type of action methodology was seen to make people, was seen to appear to people as natural and acceptable. The group working on nursing services appreciated CATFO as they considered hospital contract manager in addition to the patients in customers among the victim of or beneficiaries. Well, this is a particular point that was found interesting. In one of the teams, this was a team, one of the 40 teams working on nursing services. Of course, they started with a root definition, a CATFO and an activity model. This activity model was probably modeling the nursing activities, whatever they were. And what they found interesting is that the C of CATFO are the customers. These are the customers of whatever transformation process is going to take place. The customers and the customers were taught to be the patients. Now, this is something obvious. The patients are the customers of the nursing services. But they discovered also that the customers of this activity would be the hospital contract manager. Now, the nursing activity does not provide a health service to the contract manager, but still the contract manager would be the customer of the nursing activity because he is responsible for the delivery of the services according to the terms of the contract. So this was an insight that they developed. It's a surprising, nurses provide service according to the contract. So the managers were also seen to be the customers. Now, why is this important? Well, this is important because when you recognize this as such, then the model you construct also takes this into account. And from the model, when you ask of information needs, the information needs that you elicit or you derive out of the model are more realistic and accurate. So all these are important. Okay, the project was a good example of the LUMAS model. This is a final diagram, which is very, very nice. I like this diagram very much. Don't worry about why it's called the LUMAS model. It's just another diagram which shows us the process of soft methodologies. At the time when this was compiled by Czechland, probably, he thought it would be nice to call it by a name, and he called it LUMAS. Let's look at this and be finished. Now, as we have been stressing, soft methodologies are learning systems. It's a system for learning about the flux of events in real life, about a problematical situation. The learning is there at the top, L. This learning does what? It modifies, enriches the appreciation of a methodology. As you can see, L leading to M. M is the soft system methodology that we are using. SSM is sitting in that circle labeled M. In sheets, it's a formal methodology, codified methodology. But learning enriches and modifies it. As we have seen, for example, here that in this example, we have seen that analysis 2 and 3, the stages, could be skipped. So that's new learning about the methodology, that in some cases you can skip some steps. Or when you are blowing out activities into more detailed activities, expanding activities, more than 3 stages of blowing out would not be useful. So that learning feeds the methodology, which becomes the actual approach adopted. So from the methodology, actually you derive the actual methodology. That's the theoretical sort of codified SSM methodology, which now becomes A. In A, for example, analysis 2 and 3 are missing. Although analysis 2 and 3 are present in M, they are now missing in A, because A is the actual modified strategy we implement for this situation. The situation is S, the real-world problematical situation. This application of A, the methodology to S, provides new learning, yields learning. Now, at the center sitting is the user of the methodology, who appreciates the M, the methodology, and he tailors M to make it, to turn it into A. Tailors M to the requirements of the real world situation. Yani gerçek dünyanın gerçeklerine uygun olarak modifiye ediyor and provides this A. And what happens that the S becomes a new problem situation, which is hopefully improved now. Okay, so this entire cycle is a very, very comprehensive representation of how an industrial engineer, an operational researcher should go about providing improvement in a problematical real-world situation. This is a blueprint for you to remember all your life. It doesn't matter whether you are implementing SSM or any other soft methodology or whatever. This is a very nice and very powerful conceptual model of how you should conduct your business after graduation, okay? So that's the end of our lectures. I wish you a very successful examination week.